is a great pleasure and opportunity for me to read one of the most renowned short stories ever written in Filipino literature. This is entitled The Ritual, written by Cirilo Bautista. And the story starts like this. In the mountains, they call it going beyond. The way they pronounce the words endows the sound with a hushed finality, as though the meaning had nothing to do with the syllables. The lips just a bit parted, afraid to release the words altogether. Beyond is more than the physical boundaries of the village, more than the physical boundaries of the mountains, more than the sea and the sky and the land put together. Yes, it is not death, it is not life. It is not life and death put together. You may give it any name you want. You may declare these people mad, but in the mountains, they call it going beyond. The trouble with you, Roy said, is that you're a coward. I looked at him, framed by the last glow of the sunset that managed to pour through the misted window glass. He just arrived from the city, which, from the vantage point of this far-flung village, was on the other side of eternity. His single bag lay beneath the army cot that stood parallel to the wall. This and the other one I called mine touch ends to form an L, with two windows dotting their extremities. It was a small room, though it was enough for me. Even on a rare event when I had an overnight visitor, was still sufficient space to spare. Imagine coming here, living here with God knows what kind of people. This is not the place for you. He walked to the table in the middle of the room to refill his glass. The moment he was embraced by light, I saw that the years had not altered him. He is still Roy, my brother, my friend, trying to save me from distress, most of which he had only imagined. This morning I received a letter from Dalec, the import of which struck me only when I came to the last passage. Dalec, all the dikes in the Doni Cogon grass, Dalec of the dancing uninhibited, Dalec the devotee turned deviant, Dalec of the broken skin and white teeth had spoken at last after 2 years. Remember we hunt a boar 2 years ago? He wrote. How we crossed the line between heaven and earth in the pursuit of the white boar? I remember. The sacred grove was hardly a forbidding sight. It was like any mountain hunting ground, though there was a sharp tang in the air, while the frayed twigs cracked louder as we stepped in between the willows and the pines. Father says this place is 1,000 years old, Dalec said. By the way, we are ramping all over it. We deserve at least 50 years in hell. You can start your penance now, I said. Surely the gods will accept contrition by installment. It's down by the stream. Let's encircle it. The profound significance of the moment sprang before me while I moved as Dalec directed. We were on the forbidden grounds, tracking an equally forbidden animal. The fact that I was an outsider did not alter nor lighten the gravity of my involvement. Even as we were encircling the animal, a network of guilt was weaving my tiny holes of pain in my conscience. By conceding to the hunt, I was sharing in the malevolence of a conspiracy. I arrived by the stream. Dalec was already bending over the dead animal. A single arrow tail protruded from one side of his neck, the arrowhead having shot clean through the other side. It's not white after all, Dalec was disappointed. They have always told me it was pure as a cloud. What shall we do with it now? I said, eyeing the animal. It was about 3 feet long, its body covered with thick, grizzly hair, mud and blood glistened around its throat. Its two tusks were ivory in the fading light. In cold response, the boar seemed to cling to its mythic holiness as long as it could. We'll take it to the village and show the elders the lie they've been handing us all this time. By the light of the fire we had built against the cold, I could see Dalec's face as he spoke. It had turned bronze, his eyes shone as though relishing the wickedness of what he had planned to do. His dark, slender trunk, covered with dirty G-string, was damp with sweat. But wouldn't that be the height of our sacrilege, you ask? You could not hide the shock, or fear it was, in your face. I could not understand your concern for the whole thing. All you had to do was pack up and go. The gods would have a hard time finding you in the city, crude and walking as they are, if ever they have the mind to meddle in the affairs of a foreigner. Their sovereignty is confined to the mountain. We walked in silence most of the time. In spite of the cold night, perspiration soaked my clothes. The knapsack grew heavy on my back. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt. A true son of the mountains. Dalec never showed his face, but even whistled once in a while. The school was a 4-room structure of wood and galvanized iron located in a small piece of flat land the people called the valley. Of course, one can get terribly lonely here, and one usually does. The principal, Father Van Noort from Belgium, said. I had knocked on the door of his office at the back of his school building and was met by an old man with graying hair and brownish soutane that was used to be white. As I mentioned in my letter, you'll be in charge of the 5th class, literature and language. There was a knock on the door, followed by the entrance of a dark-skinned man carrying several books. His white trousers and white shirt were spotless. The electric bulb was reflected on his shoes. Carlos Dalec, in charge of the 4th class, Father Van Noort said to me. After classes, Dalec invited me to a drink. Make yourself comfortable, Dalec said. The old man must be in a feast somewhere. The night we talked about many things. I learned that Dalec had finished a course in pedagogy and philosophy, a university in the city, and that he had come back to this village to do his part in education of my people. Dalec tipped the jar, and the floor bloomed in 100 wet pieces of clay. A graduation photo. A dark face lined with the furrows of years, saying hardly, were the feet cold that followed your mother's coffin, then you should break her jar. I tell you, son, this house will know peace no more. It's not because my people are uneducated that they cling to Asian traditions, Dalec said as we walked around the schoolyard during recess the next day. But it's a reason civilized men like you don't and can't fully understand. It goes to the very bone of their existence. Lumawig, creator of earth, permits to their lives, my life, and these traditions are but extensions of his being. One turns his back on these, he forfeits glory in the afterlife. Then you've already lost a great part of that glory, I said, reminding him of the wine jar. That is pardonable under circumstances in which I broke it, he said. But what must be obvious to you is that I do things to break these traditions. I believe it's about time some of them are challenged. He had gathered 30 of the old villagers, marched them to the schoolhouse, where before the blackboard topped a picture of a severe, unsmiling Rizal. He lectured them on the advantages of forsaking Lumawig and adopting the ways of Christians. His listeners sat with the passivity of a people used to the hard exigencies of mountain life. Their heads, for they could not follow the ramifications of these strange, exotic dialects, taking in the words more out of respect for this young man who had been to the university than out of interest in what he was saying. A few of them, who had come only thinking there would be planning a foot-forth coming feast, appeared confused. His father strode into the room with his army boots clacking on the loose floorboards, followed by 10 of the village elders. Know what you're doing, his father said in his face. He raised his arms as if to strike his son, but it fell limply on his side. The devil has charged his tongue, one of the others said, and his eyes, another said. I can do what I like, Dalec said. To make your mother turn in her grave? No, but to bring light to my people, Dalec replied. It has not fallen upon your shoulders. That's what I went to school for. You are young, a white-haired elder said, obviously the leader. We can still forgive you. I don't see anything for you to forgive. There was raucosity in Dalec's words. There is no question but what we should hold a council, he said. The rest of you could go back to your work. With a last glance at Dalec, he held the group out of the room. The council, of course, condemned Dalec's action. It ordered him to restrain under pain of expulsion of the tribe from expounding foreign philosophies to the natives. If Dalec was hurt by his decision, he did show it. He was one who could not make a martyr of himself, even though martyrdom danced before his eyes. Consequently, there was a change in the people's attitude toward him. They were more careful in mentioning his name. They did not avoid him outright, though they took the precaution of not being seen talking to him. It was midnight when we reached the village. Arriving at his father's house, Dalec grouped in the darkness under it, looking for a suitable depository for the boar, while I sat on an old tree stump to catch my breath. The moon had come out of the layer of clouds to provide the only illumination in the place. Big, pot-bellied moon on the other nights I might have found romantic, but which now enwrapped me with a feeling of dread. "Tomorrow we hold a sacrifice," Dalec said, sitting beside me. We sat in silence. I listened to the shadows moving across the houses, listened so hard that after they had vanished with the moon that sailed right through the door of the sky, I could still hear them scraping against the corner of my mind. A ripple of noise cut my sleep. The ripple became wider and wider until I found myself sitting greatly awake. Looking around at the room, it was early in the morning. Dalec was asleep in a corner near the post. I could hear excited noises emanating from below the house. They had discovered the boar. Soon Dalec too was disturbed by the noise. He sat upright, listened for a while, and then rushed out of the room. When I got downstairs, a thin, blinding light pierced my eyes. Momentarily, I stood there till the light flashed out of my sight. Dalec was brandishing it, no, gesticulating it, as he was confronted by the elders. A crowd had gathered near the house after someone saw the boar and informed the elders. They came, some of them still shaky from interrupted sleep, some uncertain of what the disturbance was all about. More than 100 brown and thin skins. Dalec stood tall and looming over the animal, as through trying to protect it from any sudden snatcher. He held the machete above his head, its blade pointed upward, and catching the silvers of sunbeam, his face was granite inscrutable. "The curse of gods upon us," an old woman cried. "Many a year I have lived here, wishing that at my death I could see the sacred boar running. Now I see it dead. The curse of gods is upon us. The grove has been defiled. The village shall be without light. 1,000 droughts shall stalk the terraces. In the name of Lumawig, why did you kill the boar?" the leader said. "It was there for hunting," Dalec replied. "For hunting of the gods, yes, but for us mortals? The gods would no more hunt there than we would hunt in the moon. Blasphemy! It has always been, and will ever be. Lumawig himself consecrated it when he came down to earth." "That's a lie, and the others helped to perpetuate. Look at the boar. It is to distinguish it from any other boar. Its blood is as filthy. No, it is sacred. But it is rather dead. Dead." He picked up the machete and poked it at the animal's belly to emphasize his words. "Dalec, I tell you, your mother is turning in her coffin at the shame you have brought us. I am no more guilty of killing this boar than you are declaring it sacred. It's dead. Dead," Dalec shouted. "Only fools would cry over a stinking carcass." Forthwith he started hacking the boar. The blows thudded on its body as again and again gleaming machete fell on it. The crowd watched in horror, some grasping for breath as if their bodies were being hit by the weapon. The women's wailing as at this fragrant destruction of the god's minion rose and fell with the rise and fall of Dalec's hand. "Dalec!" the elder shouted, unable to stop the man's blow. "Dalec, in the name of Lumawig, stop! What are you doing?" "I'm breaking your lie, and consigning us to hell, and freeing you from blindness." "Dalec, stop it! It's not too late. The gods can still forgive you." "No, I'll show them." He picked up a piece of the boar's flesh, held it high over his head, and shouted, "I curse you." The crowd moved back, terrified, as the sacred blood dripped from Dalec's fingers and the sacred flesh quivered in his hand. "I curse you." The sound came from the sepulchre of Dalec's throat. By a crooked line, a broken line, a right line, a simple line. By flame, by wind, by mass, by rain, by clay. By serpent, by a flying thing, by a creeping thing. I curse you by an eye, by a hand, by a foot, by a cross, by a sword, by a scourge, by a flood. Lumawig, ruler of the sky, the leader said, kneeling on the ground and beating his breast. Forgive your son, he is young. The heat is in his blood. He has sacrificed many a cow in your honor. He has danced in your face till his bones ached. Look not upon this day as a breach upon your will, the leader said, crying, but close your eyes to the wind. The wind brings no message if you won't listen. The sun blinds you not with horror. Let your mind forget this day. Lumawig, we pray, you forgive our son. Remove not your love from this people. Rika, Ritalica, Tesare, Modica, Robert. On the last word, Dalec flung the boar's flesh to the ground and overturned the crate with a kick. It spilled the rest of the carcass onto earth. 3 months later. I don't really know why he did it, sir, wrote Mario, my best student. I was there, sir. I cannot describe the feelings as I watched him destroy our sacred boar. You may not understand it, sir, you're not being one of us. But from our birth we have always believed that the grove is only for the gods, that whoever enters it as much as touches a blade of grass in it will be denied eternal happiness. Believe this, sir, I was horrified by Mr. Dalec's action. He did not only bring shame to our village, he also made us share guilt. Sadness has ascended the village. As you will see, sir, when you come back, Mr. Dalec has disappeared. It is better that he had not witnessed the rites the elder held for his expulsion. Under our laws, such acts as Mr. Dalec committed are grievous, so the actor has to be driven out of the tribe to lessen the god's wrath on the innocent ones who have, nevertheless, been tainted with the guilt by their relationship with a sinner. Sir, we have to do a lot of sacrifice to wash the sin away. I don't know how will this be possible. The harvest is not good this year, but the best thing is for the sinner, in spite of his expulsion, is to come back and to show repentance. Only then will the gods consider our prayers. But we don't know where he is. 2 years. Early in the morning, while I was boiling some coffee, there was a knock on the door. Roy was still curled up in his cot, so I crossed the living room to see who it was. It was a tall, dark man in dirty maong trousers and gray shirt, his long hair almost touching his shoulders. His beard and mustache covered a large part of his face. Yes, I said, not knowing what he wanted. Then he uttered my name. It's me, Dalec, he replied. I opened the door wide and he stepped inside. I led him to the kitchen just in time for me to prevent the coffee from boiling all over the stove. What happened? Where have you been? I could scarcely conceal my excitement. He sat down by the table on which so many times before we worked till midnight making our lessons. He had lost weight. His shirt was loose around his shoulders, and his veins stood out of the skin in his arms. Nothing. I have been living with a friend in the city, he said. But why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. Nobody can help me. Been working? I could not, though I wanted to, Dalec replied. You could have taught. You're a teacher. You don't understand, he said, and looked at me with bloodshot eyes. It's not that the gods? What? The gods? You know what I mean. You knew about that before, didn't you? Even before we hunted the boar? Yes. His voice was old, tired, excruciated by a force too strong for me to unlock, but I didn't believe it then. Well, you've come back, and that's the most important thing. Your people will hold a sacrifice tonight. Wait till they hear you've come back. I can't come. I have to go. The sacrifice began 3 hours after noon. 5 men, their necks and arms coppery with sweat, dragged a cow down to the village square where the big wooden table had been set. The elders had formed a circle around this table, and they were already praying. As the animal was being raised above the pit rose, the dancing began. The clang of brass gongs preceded to a group of men and women whose feet bent the grass to a strange, uneven rhythm, their arms outstretched, fluttering in animation, who formed the 2 long lines. We left the dancers and returned to the roasting pit. The coal was now exuded a delicious smell as its fast trickled down the burning coal, producing tiny hisses as it touched the embers. The skin was golden brown and the animal was turned by equally. Two smoke-burnt men, others watched and waited, full of brightness. My thoughts were interrupted by the noise of a commotion emanating from a section of the square. The elders stopped praying and turned their heads in the direction of the dancers. For a while I rubbed my smoke-filled eyes, and caught in the glare of a bright firelight was a lone man dancing, the ends of a high G-string flapping as he moved unerringly to the strange, uneven rhythm of the gongs while shifting shadows drew myriad patterns on his golden chest, his arms elegant in their venue, his feet affirming his tonnage of the earth, his long hair and loose beard wave-like in the wind, while the people whispered, "He's back! Dalec, Dalec is back." The elders caressed the sky with their eyes and gazed at him again. He had returned, but the gods had a long memory. He kept on dancing, figure of a man fallen and rising, again with his feet and arms and soul declaring his inviolable kinship with all that made him what he was and what he would be. There in the circle he danced, record was excellent. And that's the end of the story entitled The Ritual. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you very much for listening.